Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It's that time of week again. Everybody's favorite segment over here, the power rankings, guys. The middle is especially tough right now in the power rankings, but even the top row, really tough. I think the one thing that's pretty solid week after week has been this bottom row. Some teams are pretty much figuring out that they are secure in there. But guys, I'm going to go through it. Every team 1 through 30. We're going to talk a little bit about each of them, how their weeks went, and kind of where I see them going through into the future. Before I do, if you are new to the channel, subscribe. We are on our way. We are growing. We crossed over 1,000. I love hearing from you guys in the comments. So if you have something to add, maybe I missed something, can't watch all of the games, so I might miss some key points for some of these teams. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments. So do that if I miss something. Otherwise, guys, we're just going to jump right into it at number 30. Going to keep on the bottom row here. 0-2 against their city rivals, the Cubs. And they had an okay series against the Red Sox over the weekend, going 2-2. A little bit of a highlight for the White Sox this week. They had Luis Robert come back. He hit some offensive numbers for them. So maybe we're going to see them compete in this bottom row. But overall, in the playoff picture, we know they're not going anywhere. They are by far the worst team in this Central Division. That is very, very stacked. Next up, I do have the LA Angels. I am starting this video. That game isn't quite over. The Houston Astros do have a lead with it in the 8th inning. I'm seeing over there they still have that 2-run lead. So I do expect Houston to come through and finish this game and win. So they're going to sweep the Angels, in my opinion. And so I'm just starting this video because I have places to go. But they started the week off pretty much playing big upset against the San Diego Padres. I talked about the Padres a little bit last week about how they've been battling 500 all season long, and I thought they were going to finally be done with that. But they got swept by the Angels. So they had a 500 week. Most of these teams along the bottom row didn't have like an absolutely atrocious week. One team we're going to talk to about right now, number 28. They probably had the worst week on this bottom row. I'm not ready to move them down to the Angels because I do think the Marlins have a little bit more of a future on the horizon for them. Injuries really set them back this season. They've, of course, traded Reyes, and they get shut out the most across the board. They had another shutout this week, which I talked about last week. Seems to be the team that gets shut out the most. They went 0-2 against their interstate rivals, Tampa Bay Rays, another team that hasn't had the greatest season. Not a whole lot I can garner from that. And then 1-2 against Cleveland. So only a 5-game week. When teams have 5-game weeks, it's really hard for me to really go one way or another and moving them too much on the board unless there's like a glaring thing. And for me, Miami didn't have that. Whereas the Angels, had they had a good series against the Astros and not got swept there, maybe a different story. But Angels going 500. They're 1-4. Not going to hold too much into it. Number 27, do have the Colorado Rockies. They started the week off against one of the hottest teams, the Cincinnati Reds, and they got swept, and the Reds kind of dominated. A lot of runs going on, of course, whenever they're in Coors, a lot of runs going on there. But then they went against the other Central Division team there, in the St. Louis Cardinals. They split that series, and Cardinals have been one of the hottest teams over the past couple of weeks. We've seen them move up the board a little bit over the past couple of weeks. So Colorado continues to be one of those kind of streaky teams in the bottom row. And just for that and that home field advantage they've had, I kind of consider them above these other teams. Number 26, I just shut this game off. I didn't watch the bottom of the 10th. I kind of expect them to lose given how everything just went down in that 10th inning. 1-2 against the Blue Jays. They squeaked out that Friday night 2-1 win, which had them have that one win there. And then 1-2 against Seattle, 2-4 on the week as a whole. The A's have kind of come back down to earth. We saw a somewhat different A's team, which seemed like in April, but now teams maybe are starting to figure it out. The pitchers that not a lot of people had seen maybe prior to being a little bit more in the MLB are starting to get figured out. And the A's, they're pretty much where we know them to be. On the bright side for the A's, they are not the worst team in the AL West, and maybe they can continue to beat up on the Angels. Number 25, I'm keeping them here at least for one more week, but they did have a pretty good week. And I'm not going to hold 1 week in to get them out of the bottom row. It took a lot of deciding to get this team in the bottom row. For me, there's a pretty fine line here. These teams are clearly no shot in the playoffs. Technically, I don't really think the Mets are going to have a run at the playoffs, but after a week like this, going 3-0 against Washington, they split the London series against the Philadelphia Phillies 1-1. just managed to avoid disaster in this last game today against Philly. And the Mets are gonna stick around at least for a little bit because this National League wildcard race is absolutely nuts. It's super thick. And I'm gonna do a video this week predicting how I think the playoffs are gonna shape up at this point in the season. So look forward to that. Again, subscribe if you are not there. Number 24, I think this is the one team on the board right now that is possibly flirting with getting into the bottom row. We've seen the Cubs, I think, as high as 6 earlier in the season, if I'm not mistaken, at least very much in the second row. But the wheels have just fallen off, and it's a lot of division series losing. 1-3 against Cincinnati Reds over this weekend, managing to avoid the sweep today. Absolutely got lucky in that situation. They did beat both games against the White Sox. Again, not going to hold too much into it, but for me, I think it's at least five. I didn't go back more than 5 series, but at least 5 series against interdivision opponents that they have lost now. And when that happens and you start to make your case for being the worst in your division, I don't think ranking-wise they are absolutely last. I do think it's the Cardinals. But the wheels seem to have fallen off the Cubs, and I don't know how they're going to sort it out because I don't know really what's coming up for them. Number 23. It's been a pretty low season so far for the Tampa Bay Rays when we talk about the power rankings. For the most part, over the past years, they've been at least in the top 3 rows, if not in the top 2, top 1 row. We've seen them up there. But the Rays are in that situation where the rest of the division is super strong. We got Baltimore, we got the Yankees, even the Jays, who have been super struggling, are on paper a pretty good team. Rays match up pretty well with them, and we're going to start talking about from 23, maybe even up to 7. It's pretty tight. I think I saw a stat, something like only 6 or 7 teams are even above 500 in the MLB. So when we're talking about 8 through 23, these teams are like 450 to 500. The winning percentages are so close that I'm starting to just say, if they went into a best of 7, who would I think win? And right now, I don't know if Tampa Bay can match up super well with a lot of these teams in a best of 7. Number 22. I think moving up 1 spot from last week. They had a winning week after a week last week where they did not perform. The Pirates are one of those teams, no consistency whatsoever. Some days they're playing with the best, like 2-1 against the Dodgers earlier in the week, 2-1 against Minnesota over the weekend. So we're looking at 2 teams that were in the top 10 last week that they have winning series against. But then we look back even farther and they're getting swept by low-ranking teams. Pirates do have some guys like Skeens. Paul Skeens, he's been dominant since coming up for them. Finally picking up a couple of wins now with them. They're in a playoff hunt, and they're in a division where it's capable, and they're very much in the wild card running. But I want to see a team streak, and I talked about it last week. If you start streaking in this bottom row here, you're going to start climbing the ladder really quickly, and we're going to talk about a team like that fairly shortly. Number 21, not really moving them up, and honestly, they're holding on to this position by the skin of their teeth. Jays come out and win a series against Oakland A's 2-1, and earlier in the week, they split the series with Baltimore 2-2, but they got their butts beat really bad the first 2 games against Baltimore. Managed to squeak out that 3rd game by 1 run and barely got the other win in that one. So the fact that they even split that series was a miracle. And then they almost lost to the A's again. They came back from behind today and went into extras and took that one. So the Jays, there's a lot of questions here. The offense is definitely one of them, and they're really low. They're just not scoring runs when they need to. Number 20. A team that has beaten the Jays earlier in the season, I still kind of hold that as part of the record. Overall in the standings, I think if you look at the team standings, they're probably a little bit lower on the board. But they seem to come to play, and I really liked what I saw this weekend against Atlanta. They matched up against a team that has been struggling in their division, and they won 3 out of 4 games. So to me, that was a big step forward, especially bouncing back after being swept by the Mets. So Washington, they were up a few more spots last week, a little bit 500-ish kind of week. We see some weaknesses, of course, from Washington showing up over and over again. Realistically, the rest of these 3 teams, 4 teams maybe, are better. But right now, I think Washington is playing better baseball as a team. They seem to just have that more confidence. I don't know what it is. Number 19. It's kind of been floating in the same spot, 19-18, for I think it feels like a month. They're just not doing anything to make me know for sure that they should be higher. 2-1 against the Giants. Maybe I should have them up 1 more spot because the next, I'll just put them up now. The next person is the Giants. They went 2-2 against the Padres. But for me, it's not a surprise. Whereas when we're talking about the Giants are a little bit of a surprise to me this year. Going 2-1 against Texas, I think over the weekend gives me that extra boost to move them up. I wanted to kind of reward San Fran, move them into this third row. I think they've been lower than that majority of the season. They just continue to play 500 baseball in a situation where I didn't think they were capable of it, and they're continuing to surprise me, whereas all these other teams are surprising me in the opposite direction. I do want to give a little bit of credit to San Francisco this week. What will they hold on to it? It really depends on how they play going forward. At this point, when you start to be in the middle of the pack, you have to play better than 500 baseball to really start moving up, and I don't know if San Francisco is capable of that. Number 17 was one of the hottest teams for the past few weeks, and we talked about it consistently. This week wasn't their best week. 1-2 against Houston, 2-2 against Colorado over the weekend. You want to go into a team like Colorado, definitely when you're at home like the Cardinals were, and win that series, but a split isn't the absolute worst situation. Houston, on the other side, is probably the American League's teams, one of the middling pack's hottest teams, so I didn't hold too much about that. And when you're on a hot streak, you're eventually going to come to an end, and I think that's where we are with the Cardinals. How they bounce back after a somewhat mediocre week going into next week, how they play in their next couple of division series are going to be very important, and that's kind of why I have them here. Number 16, I do have Texas. I still think they're flirting with absolute danger, but to me, the fact that the wheels have not fallen off, we haven't seen a massive losing streak whatsoever, I am holding a little bit of credit to that. They've been at least super consistent across the board compared to some of these other teams all season long, so I'm going to keep them smack dab in the middle. This week is potential where things are going to start falling. If they have another week like this, we're going to see them fall, whereas some of these other teams are going to start winning. We're going to start seeing Texas fall. They went 1-2 against Detroit, and I already talked about how they went 1-2 against San Fran. 3-game series, sometimes when your gap is a little higher on the power rankings, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to jump over that team. And I still think in a best of 7 that I'm leaning Texas, but I think we're so tight. Like, it could go any which way. Number 15, they are probably the most flying up the board this week. It's the Cincinnati Reds. They came in today on a 6-game winning streak, 3-1 against the Cubs. They do lose today, and that streak did come to an end, 3-0 against Colorado. So they're beating up on the teams below them, and I talked about it. I think they were right here. Go on a streak, you're going to start climbing, and the Reds want to keep this momentum going, and I think they will. Right now, this division is super tight between these three. One team a little bit higher. Cubs are, I guess, technically tight in there, but they seem to be falling down. But I do think they are starting to chase teams like the San Diego Padres, another team that has just been battling 500. It's like the biggest ghost of their season, and it really fell out of grasp earlier this week. 0-3 against the Angels. That really, really hurt their chances. And then 2-2 against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Arguably, you could probably put them here, but I still think, even though they just have those times where they just absolutely crap their bed, we do see times when their offense is just absolutely elite too. We saw it in the series against Arizona this weekend. Again, they're flirting with fire. Any of these teams, you want a 10-game losing streak, 6-game losing streak, 5-game losing streak, you are falling. There's a lot of teams. This is super thick, and it's just getting harder and harder. One team we've seen watch all season long have to battle their way back after such a poor start is the Houston Astros. Coming into this weekend, they do sweep the Angels 3-0, 2-1 against the Cardinals. So a nice 5-1 week, and it's been like 6-7 weeks of Houston playing pretty good 600 style baseball. They've had to climb their way out of the basement, and they're still number 13 because there are signs sometimes that this team just hasn't turned the corner. I think they will. I think they are better than the 13 spot because when we start to get to 12-7, it's teams that have their shaky moments. And number 12 is a prime example of that. Boston does have their shaky moments. They had a 2-game set against Atlanta earlier in the week, split that 1-1. You want to win those ones. Atlanta's struggling. You want to beat them up. You play the Chicago White Sox this weekend. You had 4 games to at least get 3, and then they only split 2 games to 2. So that's a team that needs to win, especially in the division like the American League East. The Jays already play all their games against the White Sox, for example, and they went 6-1. So those kind of things, if you're only going 2-2, you got to make up some games otherwise, and you still have lots of games to play against your division opponents. They haven't played the Yankees yet. They haven't played the Blue Jays yet. they're flirting with fire because these guys are hungry and on their tail. Number 11, a team that is hungry, and I think the highest and absolute strength they've ever had on this board in the years I've been doing this. 1-2 against Milwaukee, so not a great series. They had a massive offensive showing in the one game that they win against Milwaukee, but earlier in the week, I was pretty excited. I saw them beat Texas, a team that went to the World Series, a team that's down and out, and this American League Central Division is starting to show that it's possibly the powerhouse of the league. And right now, they're the fourth team in that division. Of course, they're all beating up on the White Sox, but they seem to all be battling, and Detroit's shown good strength against other teams across the American League as well. Most times, you're seeing a lot of splits. They're not going on much of a streak, but at the same time, they're not going in the other way. And right now, I think Detroit is playing pretty good baseball, and they're a team to be reckoned with. Number 10. Sticking in that same division, and arguably could start dropping this team has been the absolute hardest team to put my finger on all season long. I think if I had to rank which team is just the most inconsistent, it's most definitely the Twins. I think they went on another 5-game losing streak before finally breaking it today. 1-2 against Pittsburgh over the weekend, a team that's on the up and up, and then they get swept earlier in the week against top teams like the New York Yankees. So 1-5 week. We've seen so many losing streaks for the Twins already in this young season, but we've also seen them on the other side of it going on massive winning streaks. I think in the tightness, we've seen them play some of these other teams in the middle of the pack, and they manage to squeeze it out when they're not getting swept. So as long as that's the case right now, the Twins are holding on. I don't know what to do with them. And this is another team, number 9, that is kind of going the other direction. So we are starting to see a shift in mid-June here of the league. We got teams that it's time to get your stuff together. We got teams definitely in this bottom row, Jays, Tampa Bay, Pittsburgh. If you don't start going it now, it's time. But at the same time, you have teams in the top row that are starting to falter, and their seasons are starting to look a little more grim than they might have been at the beginning of the season. Atlanta is a prime candidate for that. Over the past 6 weeks or so, Atlanta has had one of the worst offensive records across the league, and it's starting to be worrisome, especially that we're seeing some of these injuries start to add up, pitching side, the batting side, and whether they can keep it up with all these other teams in the wild card on their tails, because right now the division is completely out of reach. I think they're 6.5 games out now, and it's only going to get larger because the team ahead of them, the Philadelphia Phillies, is much stronger. Number 8, got the Seattle Mariners. Started week 2-1 against Oakland, and then I was watching the Friday game against the Royals, and I was like, okay, Seattle's making an argument that this number 6 spot has been up for grabs like all season long. And in my opinion, watching the Friday game, I was like, all right, Seattle, you're making the argument that that's going to be you. And then the 9th inning happened. Kansas City made a massive comeback, and they fell apart. Then Saturday happened. They lose again to Kansas City. And then today, they almost lose again. They almost have a falter spot, and Seattle just too much struggling for me to be able to move them up. They're still a top team. They're playing tough teams this week, and they looked all right. But there you have it, number 8. Number 7, just kind of bouncing off exactly what I was just talking about. Kansas City's in that same boat. Both these teams, I think, right here, if you draw the line, is a different tier than number 9. Kansas City's proved to me that they're a little bit better than Seattle, and that's why they're up there. They had an earlier week, 1-1 against Cleveland. Everyone was pumped for that series. We were kind of going to finally figure out the debate between Cleveland, Kansas City. Then the rubber match essentially gets rained out, and we have 1-1. So we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see if they deserve to go up even more. Number 6, Milwaukee Brewers. After moving them up to number 5 last week, they rewarded me with an 0-3 series against the Philadelphia Phillies. So I had to give some credit to that series because Philadelphia hadn't had a whole lot of testing against above 500 teams. Milwaukee was supposed to be that big test, and the pitching really shut down Milwaukee. A little bit of concerning there. Definitely when you're talking about in the top 5 situation, you're starting to talk about playoff World Series contenders. If you're going against good pitching, you got to be able to hit, and Milwaukee didn't really demonstrate that. I liked what I saw, though, in the bounce back against Detroit over the weekend, though. Some offense got going in there. But when you're playing Phillies, you're playing Detroit, there's different caliber pitching. Maybe that's going to be a big difference. Number 5, I had to reward Cleveland Guardians, even though it was only 5-game week for them. It was more of that Milwaukee thing I was just talking about. 1-1 against Kansas City, 2-1 against Miami over the weekend. So beating teams are below them. They're continuing to play some of the best record percentage baseball in the league. So as long as they keep that up, they're going to keep up here. And number 5, I don't think, if you asked me earlier in the season with the Cleveland Guardians, what are the odds the Cleveland Guardians are going to be in the top 5, I would have had 1%. So we're seeing that right now. It's absolutely crazy. Maybe we are living in that simulation after all. Number 4, this is where it's gotten really tough. So the top 4, I think it's no argument about who it is. Maybe the order can be a little bit different. But I didn't hold too much. As you guys know, the Sunday Nighter, I always film this before that starts. So we got the Yankees, we got the Dodgers playing tonight. Dodgers are up 2-0 in that series, but I do still have them as the number 4 team on this board. Reason for that: Friday, they were 0-0 after 9. So essentially in my books, the game's an absolute tie. Sure, Saturday, Dodgers really dominated. That's one game. And after what I've seen about the Dodgers so far up to this point, and what I've seen about the Yankees so far up to this point, I just think the Dodgers, they got one. Maybe they'll win again tonight, and maybe I'll be wrong, eating my words, but I kind of expect the Yankees to have a nice bounce back. But again, it's short series. I think in the best of 7 at this point, what I've seen in both teams, I do edge it to the Yankees. Now, number 3, I do have the Baltimore Orioles, and I know I was just talking a lot about the Yankees and comparing them to the Dodgers. Same kind of thing here. The Orioles are that team that has already beat the Yankees. We're going to see them play again very soon. I don't think it's this week. I think it's next week, but I know they're playing again very soon, and I'm super hyped for that. But for me, the O's offense has been electric, especially this weekend. They absolutely dominated the Tampa Bay Rays 3-0. Got a little concerned if they could just walk through Toronto like I thought they were going to, instead of dropping the last 2 games of that series. We would see them probably at number 1. But the bullpen continues to be a story for me and a lot of concern if they can close out games. And when it comes down to these tight games down the stretch and being able to battle and pick up those tight games, you need to win those. And right now, I do worry a little bit about the Orioles. And that brings us to number 2 and number 1. And you guys know who we're talking about here. And it was tough. This one was a really tough one to decide. I ended up going a certain way here, and I stuck with the same number 1 as last week. So number 1, sorry, I didn't mean to pull that up. I'm going to talk about them first, I guess. Number 1, the New York Yankees, 3-0 against Minnesota, and we talked about it already, 0-2 against Dodgers. Not going to dive into that. But the fact they just absolutely smashed Minnesota, kept that run going. I think they were 12-1 over 13 games there. They're a team to be reckoned with. With Juan Soto, there was a lot of concern about injury earlier in the week, but it seems like it's going to be okay. And that just leaves us to number 2. I don't know why I did this out of order. It was kind of an accident, kind of shuffling around here. But Philadelphia Phillies, 3-0 against Milwaukee. For me, that almost was enough to bring them back into the conversation about being in first place. 1-1 against the Mets. I don't really hold any weight into that series whatsoever. They traveled to London. They played a 2-game set. They almost won it. It was almost a 5-0 week for them. For the Yankees, though, being on top, if they lose today, they get swept by the Dodgers. Maybe we're looking at a different team next week. But we got 7 more games, 6 games for some of these going into next Sunday. So we could see a little bit of a shuffle here. But I'm telling you, these top 4 teams, they're super tight. They're in a tier of their own. Maybe the Guardians are flirting, saying they should be there. But let me know what you guys think. What would you change up? There's probably a lot of things in this board that are absolutely out of lunch and whatever. But let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, guys, we will see you for that video. I'm going to do one midweek, doing a playoff prediction video. So make sure you smash that subscribe button, click that bell, whatever, so you see that when it comes out, guys. Thanks for your support. We'll see you for that next video.